In this video, I'll be drawing a fantasy map that takes all of the supposed rules for more believable maps that are grounded in science and breaks them. Hi everyone, my name is Nate, and you are watching WASD20, a channel about tabletop RPGs and fantasy maps. Some of you may remember a video I made a while back called 10 Rules for More Believable Fantasy Maps. These rules were really more rules of thumb, tendencies for rivers, mountains, land masses, etc. that can help you make maps that feel believable and make sense. Now, I do think it's worth knowing some of this real-world science type stuff, and I'll put a link to that video right up there in case you haven't seen it. After all, I believe it was Pablo Picasso who said, "Learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist." And breaking the rules was also something I mentioned in that video. In fact, it was kind of a sneaky 11th rule at the end: break the rules. You see, there are always exceptions to these rules of thumb here on Earth in actual nature, and in a fantasy world where you have things like the gods walking around or magic running rampant, there of course could be even more interesting exceptions. So today we're going to have some fun with those rules and see how many we can break, and also we're going to try to actually explain why things are the way they are in this new world I'll be creating. Before we get to the drawing, however, I do want to thank my sponsor for this video, Dungeon Fog. When I need a custom encounter map for a D&D game, I love Dungeon Fog because it enables me to easily create a good-looking map, whether it's a dungeon, a forest, a castle, or even something modern or futuristic. There are tons of great-looking assets, and I can even use their GM tools to run games for my players online right in Dungeon Fog. You can go try it out for free right now at dungeonfog.com, and I definitely recommend you do that. Also, in terms of world maps, I'm getting really excited for Dungeon Fog's Project Deos to be entering alpha soon, so definitely stay tuned for more news on that. As we begin drawing the map here, the first place we're going to go is to the land masses. We want to make some landmass shapes that don't look like anything on Earth, that look a little bit fantastical. And so I'm trying to, throw, for example, plate tectonics to the wind. We're not going to consider that. We're not going to consider that maybe this fit over here at one point and it's moved and now collided with this landmass and things like that. Nope, I want to make shapes that will have the viewer scratching their head and wondering, how on earth did things form this way? And so I'm going for this sort of swirling vortex, this spiraling outward sort of look for my landmasses, with this big central landmass and then these islands radiating out from that in this sort of swirling manner. Now, what could actually make things this way? Let's talk about that a minute, and understand throughout this video I'm going to be coming up with ideas, but you probably have some better ideas, so leave those down in the comments below. One thought I had was it was actually formed this way by some kind of hurricane or storm that was extremely powerful and had the power to actually erode landmasses in a certain way. Another idea I had is that perhaps it was some sort of water current rather than like wind or matter being carried through the air. Perhaps there's actually a current in the water that has done this. And if you want to get all kind of mythological with your gods and stuff like that, perhaps there was a god who kind of stirred the pot here, so to speak, and actually had some sort of staff or giant spoon, who knows, that actually stirred this world into being, mixed the ingredients, so to speak, and stirred it up. Alright, now we are going to be drawing our mountains on this map, and the first rule we're going to disregard is that one about no lonely mountains. We're making some lonely mountains. So you can see I'm making two very big peaks here, one on the main landmass and one just north of that. And yeah, on Earth, mountains do tend to form in ranges and large groupings with other mountains. But you do have rare exceptions to this. So in nature, volcanoes are one of the more likely cases for a lonely mountain, something like Mount Fuji or Mount Kilimanjaro. And then you also have Inselbergs, which some of you have pointed out in previous comments. And one great example of this is Uluru in Australia. And you can do a little more research on those if you're curious, but they can be pretty cool looking. So on my map, I do have one volcano up there in the northeast, and that one we can make a natural occurrence. I'm okay with that. But for our other two lonely mountains, I like the idea of having a more magical origin, or a bit more fantastical anyway. And so I'm thinking that they were both fortresses at one point for rival demigods, perhaps dragon demigods, and that these were kind of their roosts or their fortresses, and over time they have eroded. Maybe very few people actually think that's the true origin, but deep in the history of this world, that is their true origin. Then on this western landmass here, you can see I do have a mountain range, a little more traditional on that one. Now on this map, I'm sticking to a pretty simple style of mountain where I'm just doing a very basic mountain shape, trying to have some overlapping with the range here. And for the shading, I'm just doing some kind of diagonal hatching, nothing real fancy here. Now we are doing rivers and lakes, and here is where the real insanity begins, because we're going to be splitting rivers like crazy. Now, splitting rivers, or river bifurcation, does actually happen in nature. It's quite rare, but we do see many places where it happens naturally on Earth. So here I'm going to be doing a delta, which is one way that this can happen, and that's not totally out of the norm. But then we get up here and I'm going to be making the river split in many places, and I'm also going to be breaking my rule of only having one drainage point from a lake, and we're going to be having multiple drainage points. So on this central continent, I'm imagining that this is all created by beings long dead who decided they wanted to kind of spread the water wealth a little more evenly throughout this continent, and so through their blood and sweat, they dug these canals, essentially, throughout the continent. I'm not sure if that's feasible or plausible, but I'm guessing it is. I mean, look at the Netherlands. And now here on this island in the bottom right, we're also disregarding our rule about no coast-to-coast rivers. We do one big coast-to-coast river, and then we're making it split all over the place. And I'm actually looking at this and thinking maybe the land was shattered. Perhaps there was a great battle. A god or a titan got involved and actually shattered this land, cracking it, and now the salt water flows throughout this island, basically. And yeah, maybe there's no fresh water at all, and it's kind of barren other than that. Of course, these sorts of things do occur to some extent on Earth, but when you have a coast-to-coast river, it's actually called a strait, and it usually doesn't look much like a river. At this point, I also decided to do my kind of regular coastline effect, the quicker version, where I just kind of go around and do these kind of wavy dashed lines very lightly around the coast, and then I go back for a second pass, a little even more lightly, a little more sporadic, and yeah, it just kind of gives it a bit of a wavy look along the coastlines. Alright, next up we are going to be drawing settlements, and one of my rules for settlements is that settlements are usually going to be found near water. So perhaps on a river or a lake, or especially like in a good harbor area. So on this map, I'm going to do none of that. I'm going to place my settlements pretty evenly spaced distant from the water here. Now, let's talk about why that might be. Why would you find settlements like this? Well, one reason is maybe trade is not really a big thing. There's not much commerce between the different settlements, so they're not going to be using the water to transport goods and such. Another reason I thought of is maybe they really are concerned with being defensible. And I'm not an expert on this, but perhaps they want to be a little bit more isolated from each other and not have water as an easy access point to their cities because they're afraid of invasion. So those are some of my ideas, and I would absolutely love to hear some of your ideas for that down in the comments below. Now we'll be moving on to forests, and I'm sticking with a pretty simple yet detailed style here, where I'm doing the little pointy trees and just doing kind of a little sea of those. Then I'm rounding out the bottoms of those forests and adding some little tree trunks in the form of vertical hatching. Now, in terms of rules for forests, I don't really have too many, but I am actually making a point of trying to do less forests near the water than I would normally do. I would normally surround bodies of water with forest because there's going to be a lot of water to feed the forests in those areas. But I'm making a point to try to just stick them around the map a little more randomly in this case. And another thing I'm definitely doing is ignoring the rain shadow effect. Now, I don't really have any great locations where that could occur because my one range of mountains doesn't really have much room for forests on either side, but I am putting forests on either side. Whereas in many of the mountain ranges of Earth, you do tend to see a rain shadow where one side is very lush and has lots of vegetation, and the other side is quite dry. I also decided that I'm going to be distributing my forests and lots of other things fairly unevenly around these islands. So I'm starting to play with climate a little bit there too, and a lot of other things, and just trying to make something that I don't feel is very true to Earth climate and the way things occur in nature here. So this upper right island with the volcano is going to be totally covered in forests, and then many of the other islands will have no trees at all. Kind of like they're single biome islands, kind of like you see, in Star Wars, for example, single biome planets, like, the forest planet of Endor and things like that. Speaking of climate, I am going to be finishing up by doing some terrain here, and that is obviously greatly impacted by climate, as well as some other factors as well, but I'm mostly sticking to that single biome island idea. So we've got our jungle volcano island. This northern central one I'm thinking is mostly snowy and icy. Then we've got our kind of mountainous forested one on the left. We've got our shattered kind of saltwater island here on the bottom right. And then the central landmass just has a lot of variety, some swamps, some grassland, some forest, and things like that. In terms of reasons for this, I'm thinking that perhaps each race or tribe that lives on each of these islands uses magic differently, and that has had a huge impact on their surroundings. I mentioned in my rules video the whole Narnia thing, always winter and never spring, and that idea that there is some kind of magical curse in Narnia that is keeping it winter. So you can absolutely go nuts with things like that. Perhaps it is the presence of some artifact that keeps it a certain way. Perhaps there was a magical cataclysm in a certain area or an ancient curse. Perhaps it's the presence of a certain being that keeps things this way. So those are all fun things you can consider for your fantasy worlds. Speaking of fun, as I finish this one up here, I do want to give a quick plug to the current mapping contest going on the WASD20 Discord server. It is a contest to map a layer of the abyss. So super cool, interesting. Go check it out.
Well, that's going to do it for this one, everybody. If you have any comments or questions, please leave those down below. If you liked this video, I would love it if you could give it a thumbs up, and make sure you're subscribed so you can get more videos like this. Lastly, before we go, I want to thank the WASD20 patrons. These people are making it happen for me here on the channel. They support my videos on a monthly basis, and they get some pretty cool rewards too, like weekly live map drawing streams with me. So if you get value from these videos and you want to support, head on over to patreon.com/WASD20. Thanks everybody, take care, you'll see me again very soon.